All right, so what can we expect in Alaska when President Trump and President Putin meet? This is the first time that they're meeting in over 6 years. Max Abrams is a political scientist, also with the Northeastern University in the United States. Thanks, Max, for joining us. What are sort of the expectation settings, if you will, when Trump and Putin meet in Alaska? Do you expect some kind of big breakthrough announcement to be made at the end of the meeting, as Trump is hoping he can?
I think there's a very real possibility that the meeting isn't going to lead to any concrete, resolution to this highly lethal, intractable conflict. We know that Russia doesn't want to retrench from Ukraine, and Zelensky doesn't want to cede any territory, and both sides are prepared to lose large numbers of their fighters, and it's a real tragedy. I am happy to see Trump at least try to intervene to host this important meeting, and I think that is very different than under the Biden administration, where there really didn't seem to be any U.S. strategy. The United States just provided endless amounts of money and weapon to Ukraine without any sort of end game in sight. In order for Trump to be successful, ultimately he needs the belligerents themselves to find some bargaining space. I'm not sure whether or not that happens, but again, I definitely appreciate this U.S. leadership in trying to end this so-called never-ending war.
India, of course, has very real stakes in the outcome of this meeting because, not least because of the secondary sanctions that Trump has imposed on India for importing Russian oil, the 25%. So India is now one of the most tariff nations in the world at 50%, along with Brazil. India wants this war to end quickly and there to be a ceasefire announcement. How does India sort of watch this from the sidelines? Prime Minister Modi has spoken with both President Putin and President Zelensky in the last few days. Admittedly, I'm sure he would have told them that, look, we want you to end this war, not least because war in itself is bad, but also it has a knock-on effect on us. How do you think New Delhi will be viewing this?
I think that India has a strong interest in this conflict in Ukraine de-escalating. My understanding is that there was 25% tariffs slapped against India, and then, at least supposedly, because of India's purchasing of Russian oil, which, again, we're told funds the war in Ukraine, that India was then smacked by an additional 25%. And so if the war in Ukraine winds down, then, we're told that maybe that additional 25% for the Indian purchase of Russian oil wouldn't be tariffed. So I know that India is very much paying attention. I myself, honestly, am a little bit skeptical that the stated rationale for these tariffs is, sincere. And that is because Russia doesn't only trade with India. Russia, trades with Europe, for example, even with the United States. It seems like some kind of a strange justification to raise tariffs on India, to exert pressure on Russia, to try to reach some kind of a resolution in Ukraine, and to force Modi to open up the Indian markets in a more favorable way from the perspective of Donald Trump. I don't know that there's any inherent organic relationship otherwise between the war in Ukraine and trade policy between the U.S. and India.
But Max, tell me this. So it's not just the question of the Russia importing of oil that India is doing as a result of which these tariffs have been imposed, but it's also the overall deterioration of the relationship that folks are concerned about. You look at the statements that Asad Munir has been making from American soil, threatening nuclear blackmail, nuclear war, taking down half the world if there were to be something between India and Pakistan. The fact that India is not given credit, may I use that word, given credit to President Trump for bringing the war between India and Pakistan to an end, even though he's mentioned it, I think, about 30-odd times. I've lost count, really. The overall relationship between Delhi and Washington has slumped And many are asking, how do we get to this point?
I think it's very sad, honestly, and stupid and surprising because if you look at the Donald Trump campaign and you look at, some of the high level officials that he's chosen in his administration, there was a big emphasis on actually improving U.S. India relations, that India was indispensable for the United States. There was talk of actually increased trade, hundreds of billions of dollars more, weapon defense cooperation. India was going to play this hugely important role as a bulwark against Chinese expansion in the Indo-Pacific. There have been a number of flare-ups in the Middle East with Iran and, the counterterrorism campaign against Hamas. And the realists have always said, we can't engage in these conflicts because the real focus must be on containing China. This administration has really focused, at least rhetorically, on containing China. And yet, when you actually look at U.S. policy, it doesn't make any sense in terms of containing China, not only in terms of the weakening of U.S. India relations, but arguably also U.S. relations with Japan, where the U.S. has rankled that bilateral relationship as well. Meanwhile, and I'm sure you could speak to this as well, it seems to me is that India has not only a more negative view of the Trump administration, but there are even signs of some overtures, some increased overtures towards China with respect to flights, with respect to trade. There's important meetings coming up where the heads of state might be meeting with each other. There's been similar outreach by India towards the Russian leadership as well. And so this approach by the United States seems to be backfiring economically, defense policy, regionally, in terms of, U.S. grand strategy, in terms of containing China. The last thing that the United States wanted to do was to move India further out of the U.S. camp in the direction of China while strengthening BRICS.
Right.
That seems to me the complete opposite of U.S. grand strategy. So the question you may have, which I have thought about, is, well, how do we explain this? This is so strange. I think that there are a number of causal explanations here. I think one of them happens on a personal level with Donald Trump, where he very much wanted to get credit for mediating between India and Pakistan in terms of the conclusion of Operation Sindoor. Trump has repeatedly sort of exalted his role and the administration's role, especially J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. And Pakistan has been very vocally supportive and complimentary of Trump's role, and even talked about, him deserving a Nobel Prize for it. Meanwhile, India views Trump's role differently and has kind of chafed at President Trump taking credit for the cessation of violence there. So I think that there's a personal element
to Max, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I'm completely out of time. Thank you so much for your thoughts, your perspective. And like I said, it's a turbulent time in Indo-US relations. We'll see how this plays out. Next week, we will have both the Russian and the Chinese foreign ministers meeting with their Indian counterpart. We'll see how that goes. Thank you very much for tuning in.